Hey everyone, ready to tackle this whole cashless society thing. We're going to figure out what's real, what's hype, and what it all can mean for you and me, everyday folks.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. So we've got a stack of articles, some research papers, even a video clip with, let's just say, some strong opinions, all ready to break down.
Yeah, I noticed that one source kept repeating this phrase, digital currency, almost like it's a done deal, like it's inevitable.
Right, not even subtle. And they, painted this picture. Museums. You only see cash in museums, they said.
Wow. Okay, so what do you think about a prediction like that?
I don't know. It's definitely attention grabbing. But I guess this whole shift to digital payments, it's been happening for a while, right?
Yeah, think about how much we use contactless payments now or online shopping.
Oh, totally.
So this source is kind of taking that trend and, running with it, maybe a little dramatically though.
Yeah, maybe. But they also get into some pretty dark stuff. Like they use words like fascist dystopia
Oh yeah, I saw that.
and warnings about debanking. Basically cutting people off from, money entirely. It gets a little intense.
Yeah, that part was it's important to understand what they mean by debanking though. It basically means your access to banking is revoked, gone.
Oh, okay.
So in a cashless world, that power to debank someone, that becomes a huge deal. It could be used to control people, censor them even.
So it's not just about convenience then. It's about who has the power
Yeah.
and how they use it. They even had this story about a guy who couldn't open a bank account for over 10 years.
Yeah, I remember that.
He was living a totally normal life, following all the rules.
Right. And that's their point. A system where everything's digital, controlled by one central authority, it can be really unfair. People can get shut out with no way to fight back.
That's scary. And it's not just about being excluded either. They brought up how vulnerable we are, especially with public Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah. They called it a hacker's playground. Pretty dramatic, but true.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Public Wi-Fi, it doesn't always have the best security, Someone could be snooping on your connections, stealing your information. Imagine logging into your bank on a public network. Not good.
Okay, noted. I'll definitely think twice next time I'm online at the coffee shop.
No.
But then they get into this whole social credit system thing, and that's where it gets really creepy.
Yeah. A social credit system, it's where they use data to track everything you do, and then they judge you, basically.
And based on that judgment, they can, control your life.
Exactly. It might affect what jobs you can get, where you can travel, all sorts of things. Now, the source we're looking at, they paint a pretty bleak picture. But it's worth noting that social credit, it exists in some form already in different parts of the world.
So it's not just some crazy idea from a movie.
Right.
And they're saying that in a cashless society, this system becomes even more powerful.
Yeah.
It could affect everything.
Yeah. They use some pretty extreme examples, like being denied access to public transportation or even jobs because of a low score.
Whoa. That's a lot. And then they talked about how punishment for petty theft is way harsher than for these big-time financial crimes.
Right. They're pointing out that something seems off, someone steals a few bucks, big penalties, but huge financial fraud, they get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. It doesn't seem fair.
And they're worried that in this digital world, that kind of inequality could get even worse.
So far, this whole cashless future is sounding pretty grim. But then they bring up Bitcoin. It's like a sudden change of mood, hey, don't worry, we have a solution.
It's quite a shift, yeah. And they present Bitcoin as this decentralized system. It's peer-to-peer, outside the control of any government or corporation.
And they make it sound so easy. Just download an app and you're free.
Well, it's not quite that simple.
I figured. But why do they think Bitcoin is the answer?
Remember all their worries about control. Who has it, how they use it. Well, they see Bitcoin as a way for people to take back some of that control. No one can manipulate the system or debank you.
Oh, I see.
And it's supposed to be super secure, too.
Okay, that makes sense. But it can't be that easy, right? Just download an app and boom, you're free from the banks and the government.
Well, there's definitely more to it. There's a learning curve, for sure.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin itself, it has its own quirks.
Right, I bet. We'll have to dig into that more later. But first, I'm curious about this whole lifeline idea. They said Bitcoin to give access to billions of people who can't use banks right now.
Yeah. For people in countries with unstable governments or places where it's hard to get banking services, Bitcoin can be a way to participate in the global economy, like having a bank in your pocket, basically.
Wow, that's a powerful image. And then they end with this question. They ask, if your government is afraid of Bitcoin, what kind of government do you have?
That's a loaded question, right? It's meant to make you think about the relationship between digital currencies, freedom, and government control.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot here. We've got this one source that paints a pretty scary picture of a cashless future, but then offers Bitcoin as this possible solution.
And remember, this is just one perspective. We'll look at other viewpoints and arguments, too.
Definitely, and we'll do that right after this.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. Take a look at this article called The Cashless Society, Pros and Cons. They try to be more, even-handed, weighing the good stuff against the bad.
Okay, good. That video, I gotta say, left me with a few questions. And maybe some anxiety. So what kind of pros are they talking about?
Well, they say the big advantages are like efficiency and security. Think about it. A cashless society. That means less actual cash floating around. Less to manage, to transport, keep safe.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Lower cost for businesses, maybe even governments.
Yeah, probably less tempting for, thieves.
Exactly. And with digital transactions, there's always a record. That can be helpful, right, for investigations and stuff.
Makes it harder to hide things, I guess.
Right. They argue it could help with, money laundering, tax evasion, make the whole system more transparent.
So, could be good for law enforcement. Maybe even for, accountability overall. But I'm guessing there's got to be some big downsides, too, right, to balance that out.
There are, yeah. And they touch on some of the stuff we already talked about. Privacy, for one.
Ah, right. If they're recording every transaction.
Exactly. Who has access to all that data? What are they doing with it? Big questions.
It's like every time you buy something, it's part of your, permanent record. Kind of creepy.
And the article, it doesn't sugarcoat the risks either. Cyber attacks, system failures, those are big worries.
Yeah, those have crossed my mind.
In a fully digital system, if something goes wrong, it could be a disaster.
Imagine not being able to, access your money. Or pay for anything.
Exactly. So they emphasize, really strong cybersecurity, reliable systems, essential stuff, but no guarantees, right?
Makes you wonder if we're ready for such a big change. Does the infrastructure even exist to handle it?
Yeah, good point. And then there's the whole issue of financial inclusion.
Oh, right.
What?
Not everyone has a smartphone or a bank account.
It's not just about fancy technology. It's about making sure everyone can participate. They point out that a cashless society could actually exclude people. Low-income folks, the elderly, people with disabilities.
So they could actually make inequality worse.
Potentially, yeah, even if it's not intentional. So they really stress careful planning, equitable solutions. If we go cashless, it can't just benefit the people who are already, plugged in.
Makes sense. So this whole cashless thing, it's more complicated than just saying cash is old-fashioned, let's go digital.
It's definitely more nuanced than that, yeah. And to get a broader perspective, let's look at this report from the Bank for International Settlements. They're, a big deal in the financial world.
Okay, so the big players, what do they think about all this digital currency talk?
Well, they actually dive into the different types of digital currencies. You've got cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, stablecoins, and then there's central bank digital currencies, CBDCs.
Whoa, hold on, I'm gonna need some help here. What are all those things?
Okay, so cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, they're digital assets. They use cryptography for security, and they operate outside of central banks.
Okay, I kind of get that. What about stable coins?
They're also cryptocurrencies, but they're designed to, stay stable. Their value is usually pegged to a regular currency, like the US dollar.
Got it. And these CBDCs, they sound like the government's version of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. A CBDC is basically a digital version of a country's regular currency issued by the central bank. Instead of carrying dollars in your wallet, you'd have digital dollars stored in an account managed by the central bank.
That's a big change. So what's the upside of doing that? What do they see as the benefits?
The report says CBDCs could make things more efficient, could promote financial inclusion, and could even give central banks more control over the economy.
Okay, so more efficiency, that's good. And we've already talked about how digital could be more inclusive if it's done right. But what about this control thing? What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the tools central banks use to influence the economy. Like, if there's a crisis, they might lower interest rates to encourage people to borrow and spend. With a CBDC, they could be much more precise with those tools, maybe even target specific groups or industries.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. But isn't that kind of the opposite of what that video was saying about Bitcoin and freedom?
It is, yeah, and the report acknowledges that. They say CBDCs could be great, but there are risks. privacy concerns, the potential for even more government surveillance.
So it's a trade-off then. More control for the government, but maybe less privacy for individuals.
Right. And they say that as central banks look into this, they need to be really careful. They need to work together, make sure it's done right. It's not just about technology, it's about politics and society too.
We've come a long way from those scary warnings in the video. We've looked at the pros and cons, and now we're hearing from the big institutions. What else is there to cover? All right, so we've talked about individual worries, we've heard from the big financial institutions, but this last article, The Politics of Money, Digital Currency, and the Battle for Financial Sovereignty, this one takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah, this one really gets into the global power dynamics. It argues that digital currencies are kind of shaking up this whole idea of financial sovereignty.
Okay, before we go any further, remind me what financial sovereignty even means.
Basically, it's a country's ability to control its own money, its own financial system, like setting interest rates, managing exchange rates, that kind of thing. And the article suggests that digital currencies, especially the ones that aren't controlled by governments, could really challenge that power.
So if governments are losing some control, who's gaining it? Does it go back to individuals, or is it something else entirely?
That's the big question. And the article looks at both sides. On the one hand, it says digital currencies could give individuals more power. Imagine being able to send money to anyone in the world, no banks, no governments involved. That's a pretty radical idea.
Yeah, especially after hearing about all the potential downsides of control in a cashless society. But this article also talks about risks, right?
It does, yeah. It points out that even though digital currencies might offer more freedom, they could also create new ways for, surveillance and control, maybe even by big tech companies that have tons of data on everyone.
So it's not as simple as saying digital currency equals freedom. It depends on who's in charge, how the technology is used.
Exactly. Like any tool, it can be used in good ways or bad ways. The article really emphasizes that we need to pay attention to the politics of all this. We need to push for policies that protect individual rights and make sure everyone has access to the system.
It's a good reminder that technology doesn't just exist on its own. It's shaped by the choices we make as a society.
And this article really challenges us to think about those choices. It's not just about understanding the technical stuff. It's about asking, what kind of future do we want? What kind of financial system do we want to build?
Wow. This deep dive has been a wild ride. We started with these dire warnings about a cashless society, then looked at all the different arguments for and against digital currencies, and now we're talking about power, control, the future of money itself.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but that's kind of the whole point, right? We're not just giving you information. We want you to have the knowledge and the critical thinking skills to navigate all of this.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, the question that's really sticking with me is, as digital currencies become more and more common, how do we protect individual freedom and privacy? It's something we all need to think about, something we'll probably be dealing with for a long time.
For sure. There are no easy answers, but if we keep having these conversations, if we keep asking the tough questions, we can hopefully create a digital future that works for everyone.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you learned something, maybe had your mind blown a little bit, and most importantly, we hope you feel empowered to keep exploring these ideas.